All right. So thank you all for joining us again this evening. This is the 30C March meeting of the Planning, Zoning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. We have a pretty full agenda tonight, with the exception of our first guest. We're going to try and keep the 3 items. If one of my colleagues could post those in the chat or post them to me, and I'll post them in the chat if those permissions are working again. So let's just get started with our special guest, Amir, from the new Department of I'll let Amir start. Amir, if you can do spiel in 2 minutes, it would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner Pack. Yes, I'll be really quick. So my name is Amir Guravantab, and I'm with the newly formed Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection, which is one of the formerly DCRA agencies that split up. So now we have DOB, Department of Buildings, that handles all what DCRA did as far as the name suggests, buildings. So occupancy, code enforcement, and zoning. And here at DLCP, we do all the things that have to do with things being sold. So getting a business license, and with that business license, something we get asked a lot about is how that relates to housing. So yes, you get a business license before you do any form of landlord work, even as an apartment owner. And actually you need a business license and a specific endorsement to host an Airbnb. They actually have 2 different types of Airbnb type short-term rental licenses. There's one called the short-term rental license that requires you to be present at your home. And the other one is the vacation rental, which you don't have to be present at your home, but those can't exceed 90 days cumulatively in the year. A few of our other divisions include the Consumer Protection Unit, which is the other part of our name. So we take any consumer protection cases if there's fraud going on, if a landlord is not licensed, or if any sort of business is suspected not to be licensed. This is where the any complaints about gas-powered leaf blowers come through. They come with our CPU, our Consumer Protection Unit. And they also take things that might have gone to DOB. They're still not fully split. We're still splitting all of our websites and such, but any sort of consumer protection complaint goes through CPU. And just a couple more divisions we have professional licensing. So any sort of certified or professionally licensed things like realtors, barbers, nail salon, anything like that goes through us as well. And we have a small business resource center, which is a great resource. They have one-on-one appointments at our office in Southwest, where if you have any questions as a small business owner, you can get them answered there, and they can directly have your concerns met there. And we also have weights and measures. So little fun fact, they actually do license and regulate everything being measured and scaled that's being sold. So at a grocery store or even at the gas station. And finally, we do corporate registrations. But I think the biggest ones that most people care about are basic business licensing, and as far as it goes for housing, as well as professional licensing and the Small Business Resource Center. And finally, I'll conclude by stating, so I'm the account manager, which is like a second line of contact. The first line of contact, of course, is the phone lines and going in person. But if there's any concern that needs to be escalated, the account managers cover that. So I'm covering Ward 3 and Ward 6. So if you have any issues with anything related to what I just discussed, I'll put my email and phone number in the chat. So please reach out to me. But thank you everyone for your time and having me here tonight. And I think my chat needs to be changed so I can email or message everyone.
I already got your email in the chat and the agency's website. I will throw your phone number in there as well.
All right.
Do you want all of your phone numbers? You have 3.
The cell number. That's the more important one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. So with that, let's move on to our first item, discussion of the restaurant cap. And I'd like to welcome our newly official community committee members, and Bob Ward will be kicking off this one.
Thank you. Yeah, so wanted to bring this issue up. We're going through a planning process right now, and just to sort of set the table for those who are unaware, we have, through our zoning regulation for our commercial area, both Cleveland Park and Woodley Park. I'm more familiar with how things work in Cleveland Park, but there is a limit to the number of food and drinking establishments that can be operating at any given time, and it's based on a quota of the linear street frontage. So I'm going to just share my screen if I can. And okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the Cleveland Park commercial area. And so we have obviously frontage along Connecticut Avenue on either side of the street. There's frontage on the little side street portions, Nork Street, Macomb Street, Ordway, and Porter. And so of this sort of total green area, 25% of it is the amount that's limited to eating and drinking establishments. And that was set up back in the late 80s when this area was rezoned after the historic district was put into place. It was downzoned, and part of that rezoning process was the implementation of this cap to keep this as a neighborhood serving commercial area. And, the thinking being that rents for restaurants and bars typically higher than the average retail establishment, that the drive to put restaurants and bars everywhere would crowd out the other sort of neighborhood serving retail that we would all want. Back in the day, when this was put into place, there were 14 establishments that had an eating or drinking usage. And today, I think we have 27, so almost double that. So the number has increased. The street frontage quota of 25% has been hit several times. I think most recently, if you think back to, for those who are around, fortunately, when Polena was here and they did their expansion, they couldn't expand to the building next door because it would have tripped over the 25% threshold. So what happened was they made that use up front in the very street front of what used to be the Magruders, a little market. And the market served as counting as a market, not a eating or drinking establishment, while the eating and drinking establishment sat behind it. Similar thing was done when Ripple opened up its dining room next to its bar. It had a market up front where it sold things, and Alvolo continued that, and actually that's now where Saku Saku Flakery is, although that is an eating and drinking establishment. But it is so we've hit that in times in the past. We're not at it now. So the office, the Department of Buildings, the Office of the Zoning Administrator, keeps track of, based on the occupancy permits that are in these establishments, and we are, I think, at 21.2% of our allowed 25% street frontage of this stuff. Major changes that have happened over the recent years, Polena's gone. We've now got School of Rock and Chase Bank. So 43 feet have been contributed back into the allowable area for restaurants and drinking establishments. The Uptown Tap House, when that closed, it never became a restaurant again. In fact, it became Orange Theory, and there's a vacant space there. So that was another 46 feet that was given back to the bank of eating and drinking establishments. So the point of raising this is, as we look forward and we look at sort of the strategy of our commercial area, and I'm bringing up a slide here that has some excerpts from the 2016 market analysis that John Stover's group put together. And basically what they said here was, retail is fundamentally changing. experiential retail is what's thriving now, in addition to sort of like the everyday goods and services. So we have grocery service, we have dry cleaners, we have pharmacy, we've got a liquor store. I mean, and these things are the ones actually that have thrived during the pandemic because they're just the everyday sort of life, stores in use. But other stores have a challenge. As we break out of the pandemic, food and drinking are going to be one of those sort of in-person events. The other strategy that they talked about in the Stover report was we want to make Cleveland Park a place where people want to go. We want to draw. It may not be able to survive just on the people who live in the neighborhood. So what are the ways in which we can capitalize on zoo traffic, on hotels, and all these other things? And so that was, a few years ago. Now we're on the other side of the pandemic. We're hopefully getting, our focusing on how we market Cleveland Park. I think the worst thing that could happen is if we are successful in marketing ourselves and attracting these businesses, and then we hit a cap. And it's not that the cap is insurmountable. You can get a special exception from the Board of Zoning Adjustment to get more than the 25% space. So it's not a hard cap, but there is a regulatory hurdle to do that. I would think that if our strategy is to attract more businesses to Cleveland Park, including eating and drinking establishments, and to attract people from outside of the neighborhood to enjoy here, we ought to make it easier for that to happen and not keep around regulations that were, conceived in a time when, we didn't have Amazon and we didn't have other ways to do retail. So I'll pause there. And by the way, John Stover on this slide, he was going to come tonight, but he couldn't make it. He did send, a quote that you could use that, he would love to see this cap removed. He'd love to see it removed across the city for the reasons that I was just mentioning, is that, experiential retail and eating and drinking is one of those experiential things, is really what's driving the retail environment now. And we ought to be allowing more space for it than we have in the past. I also would point out that Heba El-Gawish from the Office of Planning is here tonight, and she is working on our planning process, which at the end of it, could result in rezoning for the area. I don't know exactly how it'll work, but maybe we could give Heba just a minute or two to just talk about this issue if they're thinking about addressing it. They have consultants that are working on it. If it's okay to ask Heba to.
Yes.
Hi. Yes, I'm here.
But real quick, before there is a cost associated with going to get the zoning relief, and it's both in time and money, hiring attorneys and going to get that relief. So if the cap remains on, yes, there is an avenue around it, but many businesses aren't going to look favorably at going through that process when they can just go somewhere else that doesn't have that process. So,
and I've talked to retail brokers who've mentioned that. The other guy who I wanted to show up here tonight, but he's actually not well right now, is Steve Combs from KNLB. He was the broker that worked on the Nando's deal down in Woodley Park. That had several things going on there. There was the fast food restaurant exception they needed. There was some screening of their garbage that was needed, but also the restaurant cap. And they went through it and they were able to navigate it. It took a while. It cost the business owner over $100,000 in added expenses. And I think the thing that was most troubling to me was that what Steve said is that, look, Cleveland Park used to be a very unique place in the city, and it is not that anymore. There are lots of competition for markets and places where entrepreneurs and investors can put their money in terms of a retail business. They're going to go for the places that have the least amount of friction. And so, yes, we can get special exceptions. What we're not seeing are the avoidance omissions of our neighborhood that just never hit our radar. because they're going somewhere else. And that I think is a concern. And probably one of the positive benefits that come out of here is like shooting up a flare and saying, hey, we're here, open for business. So sorry about.
No, not a problem. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me on here. For those of you who are not familiar, my name is Hebel Gawish. I'm a community planner with the DC Office of Planning, and I've been leading the planning process for the Connecticut Avenue Development Guidelines study, which essentially will be looking at establishing a set of development design guidelines for the commercial areas of Cleveland Park and Woodley Park, where about a couple years ago, the land use designations have been updated in the comprehensive plan. So the study is primarily focused, like I said, on putting together a set of urban design and building guidelines that kind of establishes design criteria and parameters for how to accommodate kind of greater densities, mixed use densities, especially more residential development in the Cleveland Park and Woodley Park areas. But more specifically for the retail portion, we've been doing a lot of outreach through surveys with residents, but also more targeted outreach with businesses and developers. And we have heard the restaurant cap issue come up a number of times. In our initial, what we call the visioning survey, we asked the question about what kind of retail and services residents would like, typically go to in the area and typically leave the area to access. And especially cafe and coffee shops have come up as one of the top categories that people leave Cleveland Park and Woodley Park to access. So that's kind of on the residents front, but in speaking with a number of developers as well, they did bring up the restaurant cap as a potential kind of barrier and something that might need to be looked at if any zoning changes occur in those areas. So, we are aware of this issue, and we're aware of the interest. We've talked with the Main Streets as well. And, as Bob mentioned, the cap is not hit, isn't reached right now. But, we did go through a pandemic recently, and as markets start to recover, what does that mean for the future of retail in the area? So it's something that we're looking at, we're aware of, and we're kind of just listening to these types of conversations and keeping it in mind as we develop these guidelines. The guidelines in of themselves that are not going to change the cap, but as we look at potential zoning change, as we assess zoning changes that could occur as a result of these guidelines, the restaurant cap could be one thing that we can look at as well.
So I noticed, Heba, when you, not you, but the Office of Planning put out the draft zoning for Chevy Chase, that and it will be a neighborhood commercial zone, much like Cleveland Park is and Woodley Park is, that you excluded them from having the restaurant cap.
Yes, that's correct. It was excluded. And I think, I can't say, for sure off the top of my head, but my understanding the more recently established neighborhood commercial zones are typically excluded from that restriction.
Yeah, I think H Street Northeast
Exactly
is excluded, and
is
then
excluded as well.
Prior to that was the 8th Street Southeast below Barracks Row, that area.
Yeah, it's just one block, and it has a little bit of a looser restriction.
Like
there's one block of 8th Street near Navy Yard that has 50% instead of 25% of the linear frontage. But more after the zones that come, I want to say from NC 8 or 9 on, they're typically excluded from that restriction.
So one other quick question. This is a zoning regulation. Were we to change it, it would happen before the zoning commission. And so as we think about what you're doing with the planning process, whether or not you recommend this as part of it, do you think at this point is sort of the end state clear enough for you to say whether or not you would recommend a rezoning of this area? Or is this something, as maybe Office of Planning a few years ago said, that they would wait to rezone until there was actually projects that were ready to do it and have the developer ask for a rezoning? Do you know which sort of track this is going to take yet?
Do you mean, is it going to be OP led or developer as development occurs?
Yeah.
I can't tell for certain right now. I think that the idea is that the design guidelines and the building mass and height recommendations within those would inform the zoning changes that would occur, whether it's an amendment to the NC zone itself or kind of rezoning to other established zones that kind of fit within those bulk and height parameters. So it's something that we're still looking at and we're still kind of discussing internally.
Thanks.
But the restaurant cap restriction, it's a text amendment to the NC zone. And it could happen separately, or it could wait until, if there's an OP led amendment to the zoning, FAR and height parameters, then we would look at it all together as well.
Okay, thanks.
Eva, I know you invited me to join. I'm not sure if you wanted me to say anything specific from the work that we've been doing to date.
Yeah, and Bobby Boone with Access, they're a retail strategist. They've been assisting with this planning process as well, and Bobby's able to join us here. So
Great, thank you. I think in the interest of time, we want to open it up for discussion between or starting with the committee members right now, and then we'll open it up for some brief questions from the community or comments. We're obviously this isn't a decision-making meeting. So nothing is voted on or decided here. This is informational and to inform, future discussions on this matter. So with that, anyone on the committee? I saw Rick's hand went up first, so if you can.
I'm happy to wait if somebody else has a question or a point. As Bob says, retail evolves and changes, and I certainly think it's a good idea to relook at the cap from time to time, whether it should be 25% or 35% or something else. I'm not quite sure yet. I do think it's important, though, to recall the reasons why the cap exists before the baby is thrown out with the bathwater. And the cap was really put in for two reasons. One was to encourage a diversity of retail in Cleveland Park. Just the other day, there was someone, I think a former ANC commissioner actually, decrying the fact that, now she has to drive to the Rockville Pike for certain retail needs. So I think diversity is important. The other is that we know that we have constrained parking availability. And, one feature that distinguishes Chevy Chase's strip is they have more parking. And so, another idea behind the cap was that it sort of leads to a certain harmony and flow between peak demand from brick and mortar retailers during the day, and then restaurants and hopefully the Uptown Theater coming back in the evening. And absent, some kind of reasonable limitation, it would exacerbate that problem at night. So those were the reasons, as I understand it, it was created. I think that it would be appropriate to look at what that cap ought to be, bearing in mind that it is not a problem for us now and we're below that. But I would be wary before, the community moved reflexively to a sort of deregulatory property rights libertarian stance rather than adjusting the cap to reflect changing circumstances.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're trying to keep interest of time here. Thank you.
I'm done.
Tammy, you're co-chair. You're up next.
Thank you. I think this is great discussion. I think it's something that I've always heard brought up. You know, the probably one of the number one things that people have asked me for in running for ANC was to help generate, you know, interest in restaurants and coffee shops and bars in the neighborhood. And so any and all sort of ways to look at that and generate a better, more friendly environment for businesses to come into. I've also talked to several restaurateurs and leasing agents, and you know, one of the number one things they continue to say is that, you know, Cleveland Park makes you jump through hoops that other places don't, and so it just makes it less likely for people to want to come here. So I'm learning all of this obviously as a first timer on the ANC, but just really thankful for everybody for lending their advice and information. I also talked to folks at the Restaurant Association of Metro Washington, and you know, we'll happily sort of invite them and share at future meetings because they couldn't attend this one. But I think we really need to, you know, listen to all voices about what those impediments are and how we can clear the way for them ahead.
Great.
Yeah.
Tom, John, and then Swale.
All right, thank you. I'm really excited to talk about this. You know, this is one of the reasons I wanted to join the committee here. You know, I think the idea that the cap works to diversify the neighborhood hasn't really panned out. I see the reasoning behind it. I kind of do agree, but I think, as has been noted, you know, the market has changed. So much has gone online in the 40 years since this has been implemented. The market has changed drastically. I don't think that a cap of this nature is going to be the type of thing to diversify our neighborhood retail. It seems like it's leading to more empty storefronts. And I don't think that's a good thing for us. I think that we would like to explore other avenues to diversify our offerings in Cleveland Park, but I don't know that the cap is adequately doing that for our neighborhood. I also would echo, you know, those who are saying, you know, I think that this is sort of bringing a disadvantage in comparison to other neighborhoods. They don't have to jump through these hoops, and they're going to go to those other neighborhoods if they have to jump through the hoops here. For that reason, I would be totally in favor of repealing the cap entirely.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, thank you. Bob and others are obviously focused on the Cleveland Park area. I'm the Woodley Park guy here, I guess. Well, as is Janelle. But our situation is very different, and I wouldn't want any discussion of Cleveland Park and any decision, you know, to move ahead on anything there to, you know, to be assumed to apply to Woodley Park too. You know, I mean, Woodley Park is now at about 35% restaurants, not 21% restaurants. And in a strange way, the cap in Woodley Park isn't very meaningful because the cap is only for a restaurant on the ground floor. Now, I don't think there are any upper floors, spaces in Cleveland Park, but in Woodley Park, we have a number of restaurants on the second floor. So, we can expand, go to 50% of the neighborhood without any change in the cap. So, I just wanted to point out the differences. Whatever people who are more informed about the goings on in Cleveland Park to decide to do, that's fine, but I wouldn't want it to be assumed that the Woodley Park facts are the same as the Cleveland Park facts.
Fair. Swale?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to echo what my other committee members who live on Connecticut Avenue have said. And I think Commissioner Nash lays out a great vision. I totally agree with that vision. I would love it if there was a diversity of retail on our strip. But just again, echoing what Tom said, I don't think that having a cap on one particular type of business helps that at all. It just limits one particular type of business. I mean, I think if we want diversity of retail, what we need to do is make this place more exciting so that every type of retail wants to come here and wants to be here and can actually, honestly, not even just want, but can actually survive here. Otherwise, it's not there. And so having an artificial cap, I think, limits our chance for having that type of vibrancy. And then I guess I just had a question. I mean, and probably this is to Heba or other committee members if they know. I mean, how can the ANC weigh in at this point? I mean, I know we're going through a process, and you know, it depends on like what the OP comes out with or what developers eventually do and stuff. But what's the best way for the ANC to advocate? Like, is this the right time for the ANC to take this issue on and write a resolution, or do we wait for that process to play out and then do it? Just wanted to know about timing and process.
Well, I mean, I'll comment and say that if the planning process and Eva, when's the draft expected?
I
Spring.
want to say spring, but I think sometime probably early April, sometime in April to expect a draft. But like I said, you know, the NC zone is an established zone, so the cap, you know, any revisions to the cap could go as a separate text amendment as well. So
Of which the ANC could bring that, couldn't they?
right. I'm not entirely sure of what that process is like. I think the development review division would have a better idea of how that works, you know, the synergy between the ANC and the zoning commission, but potentially, yes.
Okay, great. Adam?
I just wanted to quickly echo what Swale said. Where I grew up in Long Island, we had caps on restaurants as well, and our main street turned into essentially an endless row of banks and nail salons, and because they didn't have a cap on them. So ideally we wouldn't want that replicated. But you know, that happened obviously over a number of years. So I think it would be important to take a look at it and see what we could change.
Great, thank you. Okay, we will open it up briefly now to the community for comments. I also just put the All ANC email address into the chat. You can always email us anytime at robust length, all of your comments, concerns on anything that we bring up. So if you would like to chime in right now, raise your hand physically or down in the reactions button of the menu below. Okay,
I think Josepha.
that looked like a celebration, but I'll take it as a hand raise. See if we can ask.
I'm sorry, I pushed the wrong thing. I didn't mean to have to speak. My apologies.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Continue. I'm enjoying listening. Thanks.
Okay.
Did we have, was Bobby gonna weigh in? I know his hand wasn't raised, but he was getting called on before. Hey, I wanted to give you a chance to tap back in.
Thank you for that, Tammy. So hello everyone, Bobby Boone. Again, I'm retail strategist on the planning process. We've been doing analyses really heavily on the Wisconsin Avenue corridor, just given scope, and then looking, you know, and providing additional like support as it relates to Connecticut Avenue. Some of the analysis that we did through this process, one is figuring out, you know, the count of DC leases in the past 2 years. Just give you some quick stats. Number one is food and beverage. It's, you know, right over 300 new leases across those 2 years. Second place is personal and household care goods and services. So that is at less than 100, around a little bit less than 90 actually. I have a chart in this screen, but I was just like, all right, let me just read off the stats. But, you know, understanding that, you know, because of that, large amount of leases that are happening within food and beverage, and the gap in between first and second place, not even thinking about all the other categories that are also listed here. There's continued emergence of food and beverage, and you can continue really looking down into consumer behavior and how there is the expansion of food and beverage as a primary driver for many retail environments. And so thinking strategically about, what does that mean for activation? What does that mean also for business operations long term? I'd like to say that, Connecticut Avenue, has a home to many of the spaces that are aligned with a lot of that leasing activity as well. And so, the smaller square footages, less than 3,000 square feet in that case, are, present along the corridor and really aligned with new opportunities. And then finally, just wanted to show that there is a there has been, within the overall kind of life cycle of businesses, really difficulties in producing enough revenue. So the net profit margins specifically for a lot of the non-food and beverage businesses are really low and really difficult to operate. And so you have fewer entering into those business typologies because of that condition. And, if we're putting a, strong cap on what those, what food and beverage can do, it will, likely limit and likely contribute to additional vacancy over time as, the cost, the inflations that's occurring currently pinches some of that profit margin as they aren't able to pass those costs on to consumers at a rapid enough pace. And so, largely I do agree with a lot of the comments that have been made around, hey, you need to study this over time. But I think that, at this point in time and where we are in our economy, promoting consumer expenditures through space could be yielded. So I understand we're on time limitation. So
Yeah, and we have a couple of hands up. So Emily, if you want to unmute.
Thank you for receiving my question. I was very interested in Heba's presentation, and it seems she's taking a holistic approach to construction and development along the Cleveland Park, along the Cleveland Park area, undoubtedly also Woodley Park. In doing that, my question is she looking at the option of the raising of the cap along with the construction of apartment houses that would be, say, 4 or 5 stories high, that would go all along the Cleveland Park corridor?
Okay, so you're asking if we're correlating the density, potential density with the potential for retail use.
Precisely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we could potentially draw, a correlation between expected, future growth in the population, and with it, increased demand for, retail in general, food and beverage establishments, in particular. We see from the surveys that we've put out throughout this planning process that there is a desire to see more of these uses out there today. And we expect that demand to only increase with kind of future growth in those areas.
Great, thank you. And just one more question. Robin, I see you have your hand up, but I can also see your question here in the chat. So does the 22% include some of the restaurants that are allegedly coming, like Cookie Monster and Buffalo and Bergen, which are different fast casual?
Right.
Yeah.
So Buffalo and Bergen is counted in that because it's replacing Kaltor. And what was the other one?
Cookie Monster. Is that included? And
Oh, yeah.
I can't send this to everyone. I guess it just went to Janelle, so sorry about that.
Yeah, so that is taking Firehook's place.
Right.
And so that was counted as well.
Okay.
So those aren't adding to, they're replacing in kind.
Thanks.
What about, I was like, sorry, I'm speaking out.
Oh, go ahead.
What about the the potential tenant going in where St. Arnold's is now, was that considered empty?
No, that's still counted in the 22% as and basically what happens is even if a restaurant goes out of business, until a new certificate of occupancy is issued, it is counted as an eating and drinking establishment unless it can be proved that the kitchen has been dismantled.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was very informative. We need to move on to our next agenda item. We do have a hard stop at 7:30. I just want to mention that to move into the Residential Historic Preservation Committee meeting. So this will be very limited. But this is on the historic district demographics. Bob, did you want to introduce this briefly and then open it up for discussion?
Yeah, I mean, this was going to be taken up by the ANC at the end of the last session. And so I think it was Bo who wrote a resolution on this, which is what had been posted as part of the agenda here. And this is essentially the Office of Planning is one of the target agencies to come up with a racial equity action plan from the mayor's Office of Racial Equity. And there's a survey going on now that you folks can take on this. I participated in a focus group on this last weekend down at MLK Library. What the resolution asks for is for the Historic Preservation Office to be a part of that racial equity action plan. I did a little study on historic districts throughout DC, and one of the things you find, almost immediately is that they're overwhelmingly white. One of the speakers we had in a talk last year, Brian McCabe, who's now an assistant deputy secretary at HUD, but he was a professor and did some work up in New York on historic districts there, that when they get designated, they become whiter and higher income and more educated over time. And so obviously from a cost benefit analysis, the benefits of historic districts are kind of self-evident, but the costs aren't measured. And where that comes into play is could be multiple places, but unless you're measuring it, you can't manage it. And so what this resolution does is ask for the Office of Planning to track some demographic and outcome data like they do for other things for historic districts. So we understand where we're going. And if a new historic district is going to be created, that we're sort of a little bit more eyes wide open of what this means, demographically and outcome wise from the city. I wrote an article about this that had some of the facts in it that got published in Greater Washington this week. But I mean, 22% of residents in DC live in a historic district, and that'll only get higher as we move on. So I think we ought to be measuring these types of outcomes, so we again have an eyes wide open view of things. So that was.
So to summarize, what the ask in the resolution is not to delete historic districts. It is just to take into account the demographic information when informing the racial equity plan, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Swell it.
Yeah, thanks. How are we referring to committee member Ward? Thank you for that summary. I just wanted to point out that when this was proposed last year, very kindly, and I don't think she's here, but Leila Afzal reached out to me to have a discussion about the proposed resolution as well, from the perspective of the Cleveland Park Historical Society. And it was actually really nice. And I think she pointed out some really good, things that the Cleveland Park Historical Society is also working on pertaining to racial equity. In particular, I think, and I don't want to speak for the Historical Society or anything else like that. But I do want to say, I do think that there's some really good initiatives there that I think we can include in this whenever we decide to bring this up. I also think that there's certain things that we can discuss with regards to clarification of specifically what we want the resolution to do. Like I think Bob, like you're asked about, the data collection and stuff, I think some of the other things that would be nice to include is including sort of funding to collect this information for communities. So if communities want to collect this information, especially about their history and how historical studies have worked, I think that would be useful as well. But I just wanted to make that comment that, this kind of was on the agenda last year, and then in the middle, I did have a conversation and then kind of got dropped. But I think being one of the two, now with the redistricting, I don't know, but one of the two main commissioners where the Cleveland Park Historical Society overlaps, the Cleveland Park Historic District overlaps. I think I think in sort of having that discussion with them and stuff, I'm happy to engage that and happy to do that before as we discuss this and move forward.
John, then Rick.
I read Bob's article with a lot of interest, and he dug up an awful lot of good data. I'm not sure, however, what OP or HPO or HPRB are going to be able to do with it. HPRB has a statute it has to follow. It approves things that are compatible. It doesn't approve things that are not compatible. Those are defined terms in the statute. I'm not sure how all of this fits into what HPRB does, either in terms of approving or disapproving a new project in an already established historic district, or approving an application for a new one. So I wasn't involved in the discussions, obviously, last year, but there's kind of this piece that is missing in my mind to what you're all are trying to accomplish.
Well, there is the requirement for the racial equity lens to be applied, and the OAG weighs in on that. So I think, if I'm not, he is still on the call, so maybe they can speak to that more than I can. But yeah, it's part of the process now.
It's not in the statute. It's not in the statute for HPRB. HPRB's statute says compatible or not compatible. So, as I said, maybe there's a thing I'm missing here, and I'm just trying to figure out what that is, because you all have done a lot of work on this, and I assume that you have an answer to what is missing. What I find to be missing.
So can I make a comment? I mean, I think you raised very good points, and the statute is pretty clear. I think two areas that go into sort of why you would want to have data about this is if there's ever a revision of policy at the council level on the statute, to have data that examines something, and that would be true for this or any other issue where racial equity is being applied throughout the various departments and agencies in the district. And the other area is potentially in projects of special merit, where you have more demographic data that outline the impact. As I said, I mean, I think the benefits of historic preservation are self-evident. We're not measuring costs at all, and we should, even if we don't do anything with them. We should.
No, I'm all in favor of gathering data. I mean, your data can only help inform our decisions. But yes, on special merit, if it goes to the mayor's agent, I don't know if these equity interests are things that the mayor's agent is able to consider on an HP issue, but I just don't see how OP, HPO, HPRB are going to be able to take all of this stuff into account in making.
We can go over.
I call the routine decisions that they make.
Yeah, and we can go over what the Office of the Attorney General puts into the zoning application reports now later. Rick.
Let me unmute. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, this is as you pointed out, the same resolution that was brought before the ANC last fall. And I know there were comments then, and I'm, a little disappointed that some of those comments haven't been sort of, reconciled with this and this brought up to date. And if this goes to the ANC, I will have more to say on it. But, I would just make a couple observations. One, we want ANC resolutions to be based on solid assumptions and solid data, and the references to Brian McCabe's work, Professor McCabe's work. If you look at the literature, he makes different statements that really don't support what's in the resolution, and certainly raise a question about whether his conclusions are applicable beyond New York City. I mean, in one of his reports, he says they don't even apply within Manhattan. In other places, he says that while some of his data suggests, rising income and demographics, he sees no impact on racial turnover. So, one, I think we have to be really solid before we use those conclusions as the basis of a resolution. The other is that I would really like to see data that compares, because if what you're really looking for is the impact of historic districts on racial and economic mobility, let's say, I'd really like to see data that compares, say, Cleveland Park Historic District, say, with other neighborhoods in Ward 3, like Spring Valley or Chevy Chase. I think that's the more interesting comparison. And then finally, I mean, I would say that, one thing that has always bothered me is that areas that are more advantaged do have the resources to document their history. And I would love to see the district, whether it's through HPO or some other office, create a grant program that funds groups and others to go out and hire architectural historians and other historians to help document their history and prepare applications so that they are on a more equal footing with more advantaged areas in the city. I think that's important and maybe something we should address. Thanks.
Any other committee members? No. Okay. Bonnie?
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I just want to thank you, Swale, or Commissioner Siddiqui. Layla did want to talk to you about spoken to you about this. And on behalf of the Cleveland Park Historical Society, we are very, very interested in this whole topic. And we've hired researchers to look into if there were, if and when and which houses had any easements on them, racially charged easements on them. And they're not what Mr. Ward has spoken about. And his person that he has brought up several times, Mr. McCabe, who really focuses on New York City, does not apply to Cleveland Park at all. So I think this is just like a red herring. But we want to get down to the bottom of this. Yes, we do. And we want to get down to the truth. And I really do want to address whatever historic inequities have been presented. But I can show you a map of all the houses. And I think we can all share this, that show very few in Cleveland Park. Sadly, there are a few more in Cleveland, Chevy Chase, and so forth. And we can talk about this. And I think it's a really worthwhile discussion to have. But to say that historic districts are right now, I don't know, keeping people from building, keeping people from living is, I think, a false discussion to have at a time when there are a lot of other possible, positive ways to discuss this situation and get to the bottom of the roots and do better. No one's proud about any of this, but none of us were there to do it. But we want to get to the bottom of it and talk about it honestly. So I welcome this discussion, but to just say that historic districts should just be thrown out with the bathwater is just wrong. So thank you.
Yes. No, nobody was saying that, by the way. I tried to make that clear at the beginning of this. Okay. So anyone else? Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to the tenants' rights and rent control resolution this evening. We did have an ambitious agenda. However, the draft will be available on our website. And again, please do email comments, anything on any topic we discussed this evening, anything that you want to see in the future discussed in these meetings. Again, the go-to address is all at anc3c.org. Commissioner Siddiqui.
Can I make a quick comment about that? Because I know a lot of people here were interested in that one and they reached out. I just want to make a quick comment that I've gotten a lot of feedback and revisions on that draft, and I really appreciate it. Some about adding more detail, others about clarifying certain things that people disagree with, and to let you all know that we're not considering this, and I'll be making those updates, and we'll send an updated resolution out. I will also respond to everyone individually. So just want to let you all know that even though we didn't get to it tonight, unfortunately because of limited time, that your comments haven't been forgotten about. If you do have further comments, again, Commissioner Pagets put that email in the chat. Please do send them there. But I'm also, we're not going to rush this through so that everyone isn't heard. But yeah.
Perhaps we have a conversation about whether we can notice a special meeting about it prior to. So it's a standalone topic, because I would like to get that one in to be included in budget discussion with council. So we do have time is of the essence regarding that bit.
Okay, well, we can discuss that, and then maybe like the most budgetary important ones we can try and get through. But yeah.
Great. Tammy, did you have anything else here?
No, I think we can probably wrap it up.
Yes. I'd like to thank everyone for their time and input on this. I think it was good discussion, and we definitely should keep it going. Tammy?
Yeah, nope. I think as well. And I know like keeping these meetings to like an hour, it feels tight when we're then have all these different things on the agenda, but I do think it's important to try to keep them timely so that people can make time to attend them and they don't become really cumbersome. So we can always accept more ideas on sort of how to do that in the future. But if you wanted to say something you didn't get to say, again, email us. Thank you.
Great. With that, I'll see some of you at the 7:30 session. So thank you all again, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.